As she said,
Sorry.
it's okay.
So sorry. We are recording. We're good.
So, as she said, my name is Sue Motulsky. I'm a professor of counseling and psychology at Lesley University. And I'm a gardener, as some of you know, and I love tulips and gardens and always try to fit them in wherever I travel. So welcome. I'm so pleased to have people here, and welcome to the people on Zoom. So I was invited to give a talk about the river cruise that my partner, Pauline Charpentier, who's here, and I took last April. And I was a little puzzled, and I said, oh, really? Do you think people would really be interested? And they said, yes. So I said, okay, I'll do that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. We will have some time for questions. We're starting a bit late. So we will have some time for questions at the end. But if anybody can't hear me, or people on Zoom can't hear me, or you need me to explain something, just please let me know. I did bring some postcards you can take a look at afterwards, or when you go up to get drinks. Hello there. And so I'm going to have one little disclaimer, which is the photos you see I took on my iPhone. I'm not a professional photographer. I didn't have a fancy camera. They're just pictures I took as mementos of our trip that I'm going to share with you. So I thought I'd start by saying how this trip happened. So in spring of 2020, I was on sabbatical. And that's important because during the academic year, I really can't go anywhere. And so I was on sabbatical, and Pauline said, look, you have this time off. You've always wanted to see the tulips in Holland. I've always wanted to go to the Rijksmuseum. She said, let's just go. So we signed up for a river cruise with Grand Circle Travel because we had gone on one other tour like this in our lives, and that was in France on the Seine from Normandy to Paris, and we loved it. We're not really ocean cruise people or planned tour people, but this was really great. So we're going to do it. Well, you know what happened in spring of 2020, right? So my sabbatical, everything was canceled due to the lockdown, and it was postponed to spring of 2021. Then it was canceled again, and it was postponed to spring of 2022. And even though I was teaching, I said, we are going. I'm going to find a way that we can go. So we did. And so this is a little map from the tour company. And I'm not going to go through the whole itinerary, but this gives you an overview of what I'm going to talk about. Basically, we flew into Brussels. We went to Bruges for a 3-day pre-trip tour with some friends of ours who joined us for the river cruise. And then we met the ship in Antwerp. We went to Ghent. Then we went into the Netherlands to Vera, to Dordrecht, to Kinderdijk, to Rotterdam, to Delft. Then we went to Amsterdam area, up to Enkhuizen, back to Amsterdam, where Pauline and I took 3 extra days to explore, and then came home. So we had, that's the itinerary, but I'm not going to go through all of them. So we had decided to do the Grand Circle tour because we knew somebody in this Boston-based company. So here's a picture of our ship, the River Aria. And we like this because they're small ships. They have about 100 people. It's divided into 3 different groups. So you're with a group of 30 to 35 or 6 people. Each person has a program director that's a local. And what we like about this company is that they really focus on education. So you learn a lot. So you can imagine, I'm a professor. I like that. I like history. I like learning about politics and art and culture and cuisine. And they're really great at that. The other thing they do that's somewhat unusual is they have these things called controversial topics, where on all the cruises, they invite people in to talk about political issues that are important to that country. So just quickly to say, on this one, we had to talk about King Leopold I colonization of the Congo and the atrocities that were committed and how that connects to modern day racism. It was fascinating. And we had a talk in Amsterdam about Amsterdam's role in the world drug trade. And so these kinds of things are very, very interesting. Okay, so we're going to start.
Can I interrupt you for
Yeah.
just a second? Sorry, there's one sitting here. It's something different. Oh, no, that's not it. Sorry, everyone.
This is always the problem with technology. Get going and it's not working.
We've all been.
Drives me crazy. So it is, they're not being able to see it?
No, they're seeing, it's just smaller. We're gonna carry on. We're just gonna carry on.
Okay.
Oh, good, sorry.
So Bruges is where we started. And this is a perfectly preserved medieval town. And you can see some of the architecture and beautiful canals. It's also known for beer, French fries, waffles, lace, and chocolate. What's not to like? You know, it's gorgeous. So one of the things I would say is if you ever have a chance to go to Bruges and you haven't been, I highly recommend it. Everybody loved it. So just to give you a little context, Bruges was a medieval powerhouse and it was a trading center. It was a global phenomenon. They were rich, they were cultured, they were interested in art and architecture. It was a really happening place, especially from the 13th to the 15th centuries. Then what happened is the river silted up. So the harbor silted up so they could no longer trade, and it became this kind of backwater. And the Industrial Revolution passed it by. Luckily, the Nazis didn't bomb it because there was nothing there. And so it was this beautifully preserved town, which of course now is a tourist center. It was gorgeous. The top picture here is the bell tower on the main market square. It's a carillon, and it's just gorgeous. It was built between 1300 and 1458. The tower was 1458. And then the below it, okay.
Did it just go wackadoo?
It said unmute to start speaking. So I'm gonna unmute. No, that didn't work. Mute. So hopefully people there can still hear me, right?
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. So anyway, the palace below looks like it's two separate buildings. Well, what's really interesting is it's all one building. And what happened is they were cleaning the building and they ran out of money. So that last dark gray place is the same as the rest of the building, just hasn't been cleaned. So, okay, now it's not moving forward. Thank you. All right, so this is Bruges City Hall. You can tell very fancy. And the close-up there shows the symbol of Flanders. That's the lion with the crown. And then the other side is the bear, which is a symbol of Bruges. And this is still a city hall. People get married here. The canals of Bruges are beautiful. So I have several pictures of canals. We took canal rides, and so looking at the houses from the water, it was just stunning. So here's a couple of the old houses, churches, an old bridge here across the canal. Bruges is known for its swans in its canal, and we didn't see any swans. Well, we found out that due to bird flu, they had all been rounded up and taken away, so they had their own lockdown, and we didn't get to see any swans on this trip. The canals were also gorgeous at night. This is taken walking back from the restaurant where we had dinner with our friends. It was just beautiful. We also had great weather, so you can see beautiful sunshine, gorgeous little streets. It was fabulous. So Bruges is known for its chocolate, and the chocolate shops were everywhere. This was the week before Easter. So all the shop windows had these incredibly creative, beautiful displays of Easter candy. And the friends that we brought back candy from Bruges were very happy. We also had the Belgian waffles, which there are used as a street food. So you get them from somebody in a window with a little piece of paper and you eat it on the street. But as this shop shows, you can have a more fancy toppings. And the cookies there are speculoos, which are spice cookies, which I thought were wonderful. And they reminded me of, some of you may remember this, when I was a kid, I had windmill cookies.
Yeah.
That's just like this. So that's, I bet, where they came from. So then lace. So all of you know, I'm interested in gardens. Well, Pauline, my partner, is a quilter and a hand worker. And so we were also really interested in learning more about lace. We went to a lace shop, a historic lace exhibit, and believe it or not, they have a lace museum, which we went to. So we saw these exhibits of beautiful, beautiful historic lace. And we learned a lot about lace, and particularly the kind that Bruges is most known for, which is bobbin lace, which are all those up to 300 bobbins that you have to work. It's very intricate, takes a lot of patience. We learned a lot about different kinds of lace, like needle lace and bobbin lace and so forth. And so that was really cool, really fun. We also went to a folklore museum, which was held here in the 17th century almshouses for the poor. And in each of these little tiny rooms, they had a different room for different things, like a cooper and a clog maker and a grocery and a school room. And they even had a little working pub still in operation that you could go to. So that was fun as well. There were several other museums. We kind of skipped the beer museum and a number of other ones. But a highlight for me was the Keukenhof Museum, which focused on Flemish art. Again, this is something I had studied 45 years ago when I took an art history class in Flemish and Dutch art. And I had studied particularly the work of Jan van Eyck, who is from Bruges. There's a statue to him in the city. And I loved the rich colors of these paintings. I walked in the room and there it was right in front of me from 1436. Looking stunning. I was so excited. I couldn't Pauline was like, oh, look. I was really excited. It was so much fun. I loved going there. Another highlight, I'm kind of going quick, and another highlight was at one of the churches, they had a Michelangelo Madonna and Child. So you can have a close up there with this. And this was the only Michelangelo taken out of Italy during his lifetime. Wow. And it's beautiful. The expressions on Mary and the child, I think, are very poignant and lovely. So we loved Bruges. I recommend it highly. All right, so moving along, I also want to say a little bit, in case people don't know, about Belgium. So Belgium only became a republic in 1830, but it has historically been divided into these two regions, Flanders and Wallonia. We were always in Flanders, so we didn't go south. Brussels, its own kind of little area. And they have a lot of historic divisions. Flanders is Dutch speaking, the wealthier, Wallonia is French-speaking, more poverty. They also have political differences, cultural differences. And so it was really interesting to learn a little bit more about all of that. And Pauline and I did an optional trip to Flanders Fields. Flanders Fields is the area around Ypres that was completely destroyed in World War I. There were 5 different battles around this town from 1914 to 1918. Everything we saw, the town itself, the trees, the buildings, we were told has been from 1918 because literally there was nothing left, nothing growing at all after these battles. The carnage and the loss of life was devastating. Part of that is that there were new weapons of war, including machine guns, and it was here that the Germans introduced both chlorine gas and mustard gas. So over 1 million of the 9 million people who died in World War I died in Flanders Fields. So when we did the Normandy trip, we saw the D-Day beaches and we went to a lot of the cemeteries up there. And that was very meaningful to me because my father fought in World War II. And I realized that I know a lot about British history and literature, but I didn't know as much about World War I as World War II. And I thought it was important to understand more about this. So many of the men and some women who died here were young. This, you probably can't see it, but this middle gravestone notes that this person was 15 years old. And many of them were not recognizable, so that they are buried with headstones that say, "A soldier of the Great War, known only to God." So as you can imagine, it was very, very moving. And one of the places that we went had the spot where a Canadian Army officer named John McCrae wrote a now well-known poem called In Flanders Fields. This is the plaque. No, you can't read it, but because tomorrow is Veterans Day, I thought I would read at least part of it. In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. And then the last line, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. And this poem was what led to the use of the poppy as a symbol on Remembrance Day, and now for veterans of all wars. So I thought that was worth sharing. We visited a World War I museum, many of the cemeteries, and another moving part was Maynard Gate. Maynard Gate is in the town of Ypres, and it is a monument to the millions, well, maybe thousands, of either unidentified or missing soldiers. And the top of the gate there reads, you may not be able to see it, "To the armies of the British Empire who stood here from 1914 to 1918, and to those of their dead who have no known grave." Every night since 1928, there is a ceremony where buglers come and they play the last post. And the last post is a military call that ends the day, but it's also played at military funerals, including that of Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth II. It's kind of the British and Commonwealth equivalent to taps that we would play, and it was incredibly moving. There are lots and lots of people. I couldn't get clear shots. They lay a wreath, they play this, and it happens every single night. It's amazing. Okay. So then we went on to Ghent. Ghent is also a historic trading town. It's at the confluence of two rivers. So lots of gabled buildings, lots of canals, lots of cool things to look at. And here, I don't think you can see it because it's not blown up enough, but on this middle red brick building are the words Marriott. It's a Marriott hotel, but because they can't change the facade, they have to be very subtle about it. And then these very old buildings that like has this carving of a ship because of their trading history. So cool. And then we saw the Castle of the Counts, built in 1100. And it looks like everybody's image of a castle, right? And so because of that, it's been used in many, many movies. So if it looks familiar, it may be that you've seen this in different movies. The other thing that I think is interesting about this is I mentioned that Ghent and Bruges were rivals in the Middle Ages. So Ghent, the Flanders lion, right? You can see on the shield up there. So Ghent put a crown on their lion, and they said nobody else could put a crown on the lion. And so Bruges said, well, so there, we're going to make our symbol the bear, and we're going to put a crown on the bear. So they had this rivalry that went on. And the other thing we got to see in Ghent was a local delicacy called Ghent noses. Has anybody had a Ghent nose or heard of them? I had never heard of them, but they are a delicacy made only there. They are shaped like noses. The traditional one is the violet, but now they come in all colors. And they're kind of a cross between like a gummy and a jelly bean. They're colorful, but they're very sweet. So you never know what you might encounter. And then finally, we went to St. Bavo's Cathedral to see the Ghent altarpiece, something else I had studied in school. And this was a 12-panel work by Jan van Eyck and his brother, dating from 1432. It's huge and amazing. I have a couple postcards that have much better pictures than this, but to stand in front of it was just unbelievable to me to be there and to see, again, the level of detail and the colors from 1432, and the colors are so deep and rich and vibrant. The central panel here on the left is the Lamb of God. And if you look close up, you know, the people have these expressions on their faces, and their clothing is just intricately laid out with all those folds and ruffles. I just love it. So anyway, that was a big highlight for me. All right. Then I feel like we should take a breath, but since we started late, I'm trying to keep going. So then we sailed into the Netherlands. So what are the Netherlands known for? Bikes everywhere. Cheese, canals, windmills, tulips, and Delft tiles. So representative sample there. One of the things I did want to explain, because people often want to know, which is that this trip was called by the company Belgium and Holland in the springtime. And sometimes people wonder about, well, why Holland versus the Netherlands? So we found out, here's a little map. They're called Holland because Holland is 2 provinces out of 12, North Holland and South Holland. But those are the provinces that had the biggest cities, that did the most trading with other people, And so people knew the term Holland informally to mean the Netherlands. But it is officially the Kingdom of the Netherlands with all 12 provinces. But we were in the red and the yellow, sort of toward the North Sea. That's North and South Holland. We were also in Zeeland, down south there in the purple. So that's why Holland and Netherlands are kind of used interchangeably, but the Netherlands has said, we want people to use the correct term. So they're removing Holland from all their tourist information unless it takes place in that province. So the other thing we learned a lot about that was really interesting was water management. Because in the Netherlands, this is a huge issue. 50% of their land is either at or below sea level, 25% below sea level. So obviously, rising sea levels are a pretty big issue. And they are really being affected by climate change more than many other countries because of this situation where they have so many rivers and waterways and the North Sea right there. And so as the climate gets warmer and wetter, they're having more and more of these issues. Much of their agriculture is done on polders, which is reclaimed land surrounded by ditches. And so these are also at risk. And interestingly, it's also affecting their culture. So something else we associate with the Dutch is figure skating or any kind of skating, ice skating, really, speed skating, ice skating. And now, because of climate change, a lot of these waterways don't freeze anymore in the winter. And so they have all these national races and events and festivals. And in the last few years, many of them have had to be canceled because there's no ice. So it's really quite an issue. The other thing is that floods have periodically wiped out large portions of the population during the Middle Ages. But in 1953, there was a flood that resulted in 1,900 deaths. And the country determined, as a result of this, that regardless of cost, people had to be protected and they would do whatever it took. So in the past 60 years, there have been huge water management engineering works, including damming the Zuider Zee to make an inland lake, and what are called delta works. So Delta Works is a massive engineering project that redirects major waterways and creates this huge storm surge barriers. That's the upper picture. You can't see them very well. They're kind of below the roadway, but these are huge gates that they can shut to keep out the North Sea. And they've used them 30 times since they were completed in the 70s. So it's kind of a big deal. We learned a lot about how they were built and what happens with them. And it's often called one of the 7 modern wonders of the world. So it's interesting. The Dutch are global leaders in water management, and they consult all over the world, including in New Orleans after Katrina and lots of other places. So that's a big deal. And everywhere we went in these towns and villages, there was someplace a watermark with how high the flood of 1953 came. And we were in Dordrecht, and there was this picture. We were on this street, and there was this picture on the wall showing the aftermath of the 1953 flood. So they take this very seriously. So in an earlier water management system is the windmill. There are lots of windmills. Some of them are used for pumping out water, some of them for grinding grain. And we went to a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Kinderdijk. This has 19 windmills from 1740. They're still working, they're still lived in, they're passed down from family to family, they're very coveted. If it comes open, there's a long waiting list of people who want to live there. And it was amazing because it's beautiful, but they're not comfortable places to live. So people are still living there though. And Kinderdijk is a kind of interesting name, and it comes from a legend. And they have a sculpture that commemorates this legend in the waterway. And that is that during a flood, a baby was washed out in a cradle. And the family cat was with the cradle and balanced on it to keep it from tilting over, and thus saved the baby. So that is why they call it that. We also went to one of the windmills, which has been turned into a museum. And it was fascinating because if you've ever been in a lighthouse, it's very similar. Tall, narrow, really, really steep stairs or ladders to get to the floors, very little living space. This windmill that we went to was lived in by a family with 13 children. We could not figure out where the heck they put those children because there's like no space. And their beds are built into the wall. There were like 3 of them. This one here in the living room is the parents' bed. They all slept sitting up. And you can't see it, but above this little built-in cubby hole there is a shelf at the back where you put the baby. So it was a really interesting experience to go up that windmill. And I was having a lot of trouble with my knees and my feet, and I was like, I am going up there. I want to see this. It was incredible. So, and here's a shot of the windmills, just beautiful. It was just beautiful. All right. Moving on to Dordrecht. This is another historic port and cultural center. It's located on 3 rivers and several other waterways, so it's practically an island, and it's very much a harbor town. The harbor comes right into the city, as you'll see in a minute. This is the gateway from the harbor, and the statue up there, the picture up there is of a virgin, because they believed their town had never been conquered because this virgin protected them. So as we walked through the streets and we saw more beautiful houses and gables and such things, this is also a statue of William of Orange. William of Orange ensured Dutch freedom by overthrowing the Spanish rulers. So he's the hero of the modern Dutch Republic. And that is why the colors of the Netherlands are orange, even though their flag is red, white, and blue. But like in the Olympics or something, they're always in orange. It's because of William of Orange. And he's there with his dog. The Dutch love their dogs. We saw lots of dogs. And we also saw in Dordrecht some very narrow streets. This is the narrowest named street I've ever seen. We could barely walk down it. And narrow houses. And the house with the red shutters is not narrow, but it was from 1658. We also had a chance to try, like the Ghent noses. Here we got little mini pancakes that the Dutch are known for. They're delicious. And I told you that the streets are the canals, and people park their boats the way we would park our cars, along the street in front of their house. So we then sailed to Rotterdam. Rotterdam was completely destroyed in World War II. The Nazis bombed it. And so it is a very modern rebuilt city with a lot of contemporary architecture. So the contrast between the little bits of the medieval town that survive and these very, very modern buildings is really interesting. However, I didn't go on that walking tour because I couldn't walk, and I desperately wanted to go to Delft. So I saved myself for our side trip to Delft, which is the home of Vermeer and the Royal Delft Porcelain Factory. So we got a tour of the factory. Pauline loves factory tours, how to make anything. And we got to see them hand painting the porcelain. We got to see how they made it. It was really interesting. And this is a showcase of one of Vermeer, who also is from Delft, one of his famous paintings, all done in this traditional blue and white Delft tile. It was pretty incredible. So there's the entry, the Royal Delft from 1653. And I collect teapots. So I often get a teapot from places I've been, and I thought, maybe I could afford a Delft teapot. Wouldn't that be cool? Well, a teapot like the one in this photo, hand painted, was, let me find it, 785 euros. That's about $900. Not getting a teapot for $900. So that was out. I did, however, find in Delft Square, they have a bunch of, not Royal Delft, but other people who do handmade teapots. And I did get one that was much more affordable, but it doesn't come with bragging rights. So, there we go. It is very nice. Okay, now one of the highlights of this trip was a day at Keukenhof Tulip Gardens. If anyone gets a chance to go, don't miss it. This is one of the most amazing things I have ever seen in my life. So Keukenhof is about 70 plus acres of tulips, daffodils, grape hyacinths, other spring bulbs. They plant 7 million bulbs a year, every year, 7 million. It's only open for about 6 weeks, mid-March to mid-May. We were there. It was a beautiful, perfect day. We were there in peak bloom. It was stunning, and it's huge. It's huge, 70 acres. They have all these pavilions. They have all these things. So I took 138 pictures. I'm just going to show you a few of them. I counted 138. Just so you get a little sense of the place. It was stunning, really stunning. I've never seen anything like it, really. These rivers of grape hyacinths, it was just amazing. And it was very beautiful and peaceful, although it was mobbed with people, of course. So then we went to a tulip farm that had pick your own tulips. So we had a talk about how to grow tulips. And then we were set into the fields and allowed to pick our own tulips. And there's Pauline with the tulip bouquet that we then took back to our ship and put in our cabin. So that was really fun. And then we cruised to Inkhausen. Inkhausen is on the north next to the Zuider Zee. And it was a trading post and a fishing town. It was known for its herring, and also its ties to the Dutch East India Company. So it was very interesting, but in 1932, the Zuider Zee was closed by a dam to the North Sea, and therefore it became a large inland freshwater lake, which meant the fishing industry was destroyed, and it became a ghost town. And now it's, of course, a tourist town, and the lake is now very, very popular with sailboats. So they have 3 harbors. One, as you see here, is for old sailing ships. One is for modern ships. We were docked next to 2 other cruise ships. And one is for sailboats. There's like masts everywhere you go. So we took a walking tour and we went through the remaining city gate and defense post and saw beautiful houses and architecture, beautiful little canals with pretty little houses all lining them. It's very nice. But we also were treated to a Dutch delicacy, raw herring. with raw onion. And kibbeling, which is fried cod bites with mayonnaise. I declined those treats, but in Amsterdam, the thing to do is to get raw herring and just go like this and swallow it whole. I also declined that. But fun things to know and tell, right? One of the things we loved about Enkhuizen is because they had lost the fishing industry, they created the Zuiderzee Open Air Museum, which is about 105 buildings from 1905. Like Sturbridge Village, they have actors playing the role of the townspeople. And they have this whole little fishing village of little tiny houses on streets. Those are cod hanging out there and herring to dry. And they have people, here's someone in the street, because the houses are really small, doing the work. And then they have a town center that has homes and farms with pigs and cows and sheep and chickens running around, and a church and a school and a whole bunch of shops and trades and so forth. It's very interesting, partly because it was so big. I mean, so many buildings and over quite a bit of space. And of course, they had a windmill, and there's the bathroom facilities. And in the town, they also had a schoolroom, post office. I bought stamps. And the sign for the apothecary, which we thought was interesting because, of course, if you're sick, you go to someone and you say, and you take medicine. And so they had a display of all these heads with open mouths that had indicated where the apothecary is in these old towns. They also had a lot of children's activities, which I thought was really good. That you could dress up in your wooden shoes and your Dutch clothes. We saw a lot of little kids doing that. And you could play children's games, and you could hear recordings of what the children were doing day-to-day life. So it was really well done. It was really interesting. Enkhuizen is also where we had something else that Grand Circle Travel does, which is a home-hosted visit, where you go to a local person's house for coffee and sweets, and you just get to chat about what it's like to live there. So that's always fun. Okay, moving right along here, because I want to save a few minutes for questions. Amsterdam. So Amsterdam was our last stop. And what's noticeable about Amsterdam is bikes, 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 bikes. Everywhere there are bikes, you take your life in your hands to cross the street because bikes have the right of way. Lots and lots of canals. Lots of the canals had houseboats because land is scarce and housing is very expensive. So it was really interesting to look there. We took a canal tour during the day. We took a canal tour at night, which was really fascinating. We had dinner with our friends, rice tafel or rice table is an Indonesian Dutch dining experience. I highly recommend it. So you have lots and lots and lots of little dishes with your rice, varying from mild to spicy, you know, the Spice Islands. So Amsterdam has tons of Indonesian restaurants, although actually several of them closed during the pandemic, but they still have some. We had it twice. It was fabulous. So rice tafel is another go-to experience. And then I mentioned bikes. There is a multi-story bike garage in Amsterdam because there are so many bikes. Everybody in the country has a bike. Many of them have 2 bikes. The other thing I have here is in Dam Square, the center of Amsterdam. This is the national monument to World War II casualties. Because the Netherlands were occupied by the Germans during World War II. And this includes, those casualties include about 60,000 deported Jews, which decimated the Jewish population of Amsterdam and forced a lot of people like Anne Frank's family into hiding. It also commemorates the starving populace in the hunger winter of 1944-45, where the Nazis cut off food supplies and about 20,000 people died. People subsisted on tulip bulbs to try to stay alive. And again, beautiful gables, beautiful houses. This one is one of my favorites with the goat on top of the gable. And we went to a ton of museums, which I can't talk about, but the Canal Merchant House, this is the garden in back of the Canal Merchant House. And we saw the Cheese Museum and the Tulip Museum. So those were fun. Amsterdam has tons of museums. We didn't get to half of them. There's sex museums and pop museums and the Museum of Bags and Purses and the Household Museum. And I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on.
There's the Museum of Torture.
Oh, there probably is.
Right in Amsterdam, the Museum of Torture.
Yeah, there's lots of different ones.
That one.
We didn't get to all of them. So we did spend about 6 hours at the Rijksmuseum, one of my longtime dreams come true, looking at all the Dutch art. The famous ones are the Rembrandts, including Night Watch, and the Vermeers. But having studied this, I was in heaven. I really enjoyed them, and I particularly liked the still lifes. We also, that's the Rijksmuseum on the bottom there. We went to the Van Gogh Museum, his iris paintings. And we went to the Anne Frank house. That's another kind of don't miss, that if you've never been there, it was so moving. And I can't imagine anyone experiencing it who would not be touched by it. It's a real visceral experience. It's really hard to put into words. But it was a definite highlight, if you could say it that way. And here we have some Vermeer, a Rembrandt, and a still life. And then finally, we had some other interesting museums. One was a fascinating museum in the middle of the red light district called Our Lord in the Attic. It's a hidden church museum. Westerkerk is another church that we went to. But I want to just say quickly about the Our Lord in the Attic. So what happened is from the 1550s, Catholics, after the Dutch Reformation, Catholics were not allowed to worship publicly. And so for about 2 centuries, and it went on for a very long time. But the Dutch, being very tolerant, I mean, think about the way they're tolerant about pot and prostitution today. They were tolerant about Catholics. They're, okay, we won't, torture you or hang you or do any of that. But you can't worship in public. It has to be out of sight. And so there are these hidden Catholic churches. This one was so creative. This was a merchant who bought 2 canal houses, fronting the canal, had his house on the bottom, did his trading business. And once you go upstairs, all of a sudden you come into this incredible carved out space, 2 floors. It's 150 capacity Catholic church, which includes an altar, an organ, quarters for the priest beyond there. It was really interesting, really, really interesting. Okay, so this is the end of our Amsterdam trip. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I know we're running a little bit late. If you need to leave, feel free. Otherwise, I think we can stay 5 or 10 minutes. I'd be really happy to answer questions, either from the people on Zoom or from all of you. I know I went through that pretty quickly, but I'd be happy to answer questions. Yeah, Christine.
You mentioned that a lot of the pictures that you used were postcards?
No,
No.
postcards are over there.
Oh, so I got that wrong. So those were your pictures?
Those are
Yeah.
my pictures.
That's great, because I didn't see a ton of people in the photos, so somehow you went at times when it wasn't that packed.
Well, I'll tell you that in Keukenhof, it's impossible. There are people in all those. I tried to minimize them, but I mean, it was just mobbed. But
And
I
you don't see
tried.
that in the photo, so nice job.
Thank you.
yeah,
I tried. I couldn't always do it, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and the tulip photos were yours.
yes,
Nice.
some of the 138.
Amazing.
You got
Yeah.
some great pictures, Sue. Even though it was just your phone, I mean, they're really very nice.
I know, I was really happy, actually. I did have a total of about 740, so I could pick the best ones, just saying. Other things, yes, Al.
How long was it again?
It was almost 3 weeks. 2 3/4 a week. Yeah, yeah. Christine, sorry.
One more question, or two more questions. Where did you stay? Did you stay on the boat? or-
Yeah, so we stayed in Bruges first for 3 days in a hotel.
Yeah.
Then we were on the boat for everything till Amsterdam. And then we left the cruise and stayed on our own. So we had an inexpensive hotel in Amsterdam on our own.
So in Bruges, I was looking at those photos. It looks like some of the buildings are in the water.
They're right on the edge. I mean, the water is everywhere. So they come right up to the edge of the houses.
In a lot of the canals, if you look along the canals, you can see doors into the building that look like garage doors or entry doors into the building right from the water.
For your boat.
The water's here and your door is here. I mean, it really, that wouldn't take much to flood any of those places.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
What were your accommodations like on the ship?
Well, I don't have a picture of that, but basically the cabins on river cruise ship, the only ones we've been on. Grand Circle is also less expensive than someplace like Viking. So Viking, I think, is much more luxurious. You have a lot more gilt and glitter, and which we don't care about, and we don't want to pay for. But this is the basic cabin. You walk in, there's a window. And then there's 2 beds that fold up during the day to make like 2 sofas.
Yeah.
And then you fold them down, single beds.
Yeah.
And in the middle, there's a table.
Yeah.
And then there's you have shelves above to put your clothes. There's a teeny little closet. And then there's a little tiny bathroom, tiny. Yeah.
Can you say a little more about the windmill living situation? It just looks so intriguing.
It was
was
really
fascinating.
interesting. It was fascinating. So when you go in, so really you can see what they look like, right? It really is like a lighthouse. The bottom floor is gears and machinery, so there's no living space there. And then you climb up the ladder, there's 2 more floors. And so it's in a circle, right? And the middle has the mechanism.
Right.
So you have these little rooms, spaces. And then, like I said, in this one, that had the 13 children, there were 3 beds built into the wall for the kids. And then they had that little living room. And they had a tiny, tiny little cabinet that had like dishes and things like that in it. That was it.
The only heat was the 1 stove in the 1 room. That was it.
For running water.
No,
No,
outhouse.
Yeah.
And the kitchen was outside as well.
yeah.
They had sort of like a separate outbuilding, because it was a wood fired heater or wood fired. So you imagine it would be pretty cool.
Yeah. it
There
was
were not enough
fascinating.
beds in the place for 13 people to be living in that thing. So some of them either grew out of there or were sleeping on the floor.
Where sleep time rotated.
Yeah. Right. Well, and in those days, a lot of people slept together, so kids would sleep
Yeah.
5 to a bed.
Yeah,
But
right.
these were very small. I
They're
mean,
pretty small.
it'd be hard to get them in there.
I went to one of those windmills and the stairs were really steep
Yeah,
and there was no banister.
right.
And I climbed to the top of the stairs and I was thrilled. I was so proud of myself. And then
Me too.
I realized that I had to go down.
And you had to get back down, right?
That was way harder than, did you have the same experience?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah.
I needed to be flanked on both, but I couldn't be because it was too narrow. I
Right.
had to do it by myself. Everyone was on the bus getting ready to leave, and I was still in there.
Other questions? Yeah, Erin.
Yeah, So I don't know how much exposure you had to like, like, I don't know, populations where you were going, but like, I'm also interested, I mean, I'm fascinated by like what you're talking about,
Mhm.
but I'm also interested in like sort of the, I don't know, you were there doing like sort of like a time that's cataclysmic globally, right? So like, I don't know, like, I guess another question that I would have is, did you run into anything that, where you could talk about like how, you were being perceived as an American, or like how things were being perceived in terms of like, we're here in this very specific place with our own understanding of like the war in Ukraine,
Yeah.
the climate change, et cetera. I mean, did you run into anything, I guess, that like was surprising or different in
Mhm.
terms of like, these sort of like global things that
Right.
we think about, that like we encounter every day?
Right. Well, one of the things we like about this cruise company is the local guides, because they always hire guides from that area.
Yeah.
And they are really encouraged to talk to us about what those issues are. How do the people perceive politics, climate change? There was a lot of talk about the war in Ukraine. Obviously, that was pretty new. So there was a lot of talk about that. I will say that unfortunately, we didn't have lots and lots of interaction with the locals, except people who are in the tourist industry, shopkeepers and people like that. So we loved hearing from the local guides, and that's also why we like this home hosted visit, because we can go and we can talk to people about what is your daily life like? What do you think? But getting really how they think about America, I don't think anybody would say that. So I don't really know. I mean, it would be great to have more of those interactions.
So you feel like you were sort of like, coddled in a way because you were the buyer?
Well, I mean, we were in tourist places.
Yeah.
Right, so, and I will say, lots of places in Belgium and the Netherlands had just opened up after the pandemic. They were thrilled to have tourists, they were thrilled to have visitors, because they hadn't. And so that was also a particular time, and may have affected how we were greeted. But it was really good to hear from the local guides. Those kinds of things were kind of our window in, and then the talks where they came on the ship and led these discussions was also, really interesting.
Anything you were surprised by?
Well, I didn't know all of the history. I mean, so I was really interested more than particularly surprised. Anything you can think of?
No, a little bit, I was surprised at how much English, the population spoke.
Yeah,
And it seems that they started really in grade school somewhere speaking English. And of course, again, being in tourist spots. Because I don't think we bumped into a situation where we needed a translator, but there were some times when we were on our own. Most of the time with the cruise, most of our meals were on the ship, and that's the time that you're more likely to bump into local people. And when we were in Bruges, we were all on our own for food, and we didn't. There were trouble with milk, but other than that.
So I gotta just say this because she brought it up. So I'm a tea drinker. That's why I collect teapots. So I'm a tea drinker. British tea means milk. And I kept asking for milk and getting coffee creamer, the fake chemical stuff. And I would say, no, I want milk with my tea, coffee creamer. So finally, after doing this several times in one restaurant, I said to the waiter, they did all speak English. It wasn't a language problem.
Right.
I said, I mean, milk from a cow. He said, oh, normal milk. There we go. There we go. So there's that. And I will say the one place I remember, we went to a place in Keukenhof with Gail and Donna, and it was the only time we had a menu all in Dutch. Most of the time they had an English menu, but this was all in Dutch, which none of us were fluent in. And so we did a lot of guessing, and the server could speak English, but not really great. And so we have lovely, I love these. I actually love doing this. These sort of linguistic exchanges where you try to figure things out. So that was kind of fun. I also want to make sure there are no questions from the Zoom people, because I don't want to ignore them.
We don't have any questions except a thank you from Loretta.
Okay,
So if anyone wants to ask questions, now's a good time.
all right,
I have a question about
Yeah.
Keukenhof.
yeah,
What does it look like other seasons?
it's closed, so you
Oh,
can't
it's
get in.
Ah,
It's just closed.
Yeah.
Now, I did
Yeah.
read that they do this planting 7 million bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
From September to November, it takes a while. So the workers are out there planting everything. But it's only open mid-March to mid-May. Yeah, Aaron.
And just in terms of, in your travels, so there's a lot of beauty in these like very formal planned gardens that you visited.
Mhm.
But in your travels, did you see anything sort of like, I don't know, like naturally occurring, flora
Yeah,
that you were impressed by or surprised by?
yeah, absolutely. I will say we were there in April. So mostly what we saw were spring blooming shrubs or trees and bulbs. But a lot of them were informal. I mean, because the Keukenhof is so spectacular, that's most of my pictures. I have other ones I didn't include in here of tulips just in people's yards or, outside of a restaurant so people did use tulips a lot. And there were also other flowering, areas. Like, for example, when we went to the home hosted visit in Enkhuizen, this was a woman who a single woman, lived in a small condo. She had a tiny front garden, but it was full of flowering shrubs and other kind of perennials and bulbs and stuff like that. And a lot of the houses, like we would walk along the canal and there'd be all these houses and a lot of them would have a container outside the front door planted with a little tree or a little shrub or bulbs. So yes, they really like their flowers. It was everywhere.
But the other thing about the landscape, they don't have big trees, I think probably because of the water table, but there are willows
Mhm.
everywhere.
If you go to the eastern part, it's very different.
Yeah, well, we were not there, in the part that we were at where was all that water, but they planted willows all along the canals and the other waterways, so. I think to help hold the ground as part of that, but there wasn't anything really much bigger than that, so. it was
Yeah, in the
all-
photos.
Yeah.
The trees we saw, a number of them were sort of coppiced.
Yes,
Yeah,
And with
yeah.
the little tiny sprouts that come out.
yeah,
yeah.
we saw,
The espalier trees, we saw, they were using those, in one of the cities that was their sidewalk tree. Something this way and cut, and we just, they're the funniest looking things, because they weren't in bloom, so they're all
Right.
branches, and they're just, they,
yeah,
We're not used to it.
yeah, they were.
Right.
Then go painted, a
yeah,
lot of them.
right.
So,
Yeah, so many of the trees were coppiced, absolutely. And it would look different if we were there in the summer.
Right.
Because
Sure.
they had just been
Yeah.
cut, so they weren't out,
Yeah.
quote unquote, yet.
Mm.
So,
It was different.
yes,
Sorry. Also, the houses along the canals have their gardens in the back.
yes,
Yeah, that you don't see, yeah.
yeah, yeah, they're usually kind of sort of narrow and long, they go back.
Right.
So you can see them there, yeah. Other questions or comments?
There's one comment from Kathy, thanking you for a terrific presentation and fantastic stories and pictures.
Oh,
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree.
All right, well,
Thank you.
thank you. Like I said, when I was asked to do this, I thought, gosh, I don't know if anybody would be interested. So I'm thrilled that we have this many people and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Sue.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. And please, there's snacks. You can look at the postcards, cider, whatever. And thank you to the people on Zoom.
Good night, everyone. I'm gonna end the meeting now.